Go to a spring and wash yourself.
Since he was a moon doctor.
Say it's awful hot and they want to buy us something.
Yes, we had plenty of witches over on the mountain.
And on its side was the devil.
Don't let them borrow nothing.
The idea of witch seems to scare people into thinking evil thought.
The Appalachians are the oldest mountains in the world. For at least 10,000 years, people have matched their wits against this unyielding land. Without benefit of today's scientific understanding and principles, European settlers, and now their descendants, inherited Old World physical and psychological ways to deal with dangers, both real and imagined. This rich body of lore remains in existence and still functions within the folkways of some very special people. Beginning in the late 17th century, large numbers of religiously and socially oppressed Germans immigrated to the mid-Atlantic region of North America. As settlement came to western Virginia in the 18th century, many of these people came to this new frontier and even participated in the Indian Wars. They quickly gained the pioneer skills needed to survive in this new harsh environment, but they retained Old World folkways as well. Their German ways remain particularly strong in some areas, and their Old World folklore continues as a presence in their belief systems. Johnny Arvin is the keeper of local history in this neighborhood. All through life, Johnny listened and remembered. He didn't learn it from books, he learned it from people. He's a man in his 9th decade of life, but he still begins stories with, "Daddy said..."
My daddy said that what his grandfather told him, he'd take a piece of cloth and lay the closest to the rupture. You see, the curing for rupture in that case.
My father used some sign cures. Like one was rupture.
And there's there in that little meadow, and there's a plug in an apple tree there. I said, "Bill, what is that doing now? I'm going to pull that." Oh, he said, don't pull that out. Said, "Dad put that there." I said, "Don't pull it out."
And one old gentleman told me one time, "Oh, yes," he said, "I know your dad." He said, "I had a kid was ruptured one time. He had to come early of a morning.
Before sunrise, and facing east, where you're supposed to do it in a fruit tree.
They took had to be a piece of a fingernail, some from the upper part of the body, piece of the toenail. He would bore a hole in a fruit tree. It had to be some bared fruit.
Then take a piece of your fingernails, a piece of some hair, and maybe a piece off your toenail, just like you're trimming them, and put it in that and cloth and roll it up and push it in that hole.
Put it in, drove a plug behind it.
Wooden plug, take a hammer, done in 3 blows, and your first blow you'd say, in the name of the Father, the name of the Son, and the name of the Holy Ghost.
Well, you take and write your ticket. Don't talk to nobody. And Jesus said unto thee, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship thy Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then you put their name, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. You take your auger and go to the oak tree and bore a hole in the tree. Stick your ticket in there, and then take you an iron rod and a hammer. Put the iron rod in there and hit it. And whoever does it will either fall, hurt themselves, or get hit, or something.
She had a tree of the house. She called her pin tree. And she had a black cat she'd send across the hill to her other sister. She'd drive pins in that cherry tree. Whenever she wanted to bewitch someone, she'd put a pin in that tree. He never got mom, she never got dad, because they always carried a ticket.
You can doctor somebody. Say, you doctor me here in my home. Okay? And they come in from outside and go to my kitchen, get a drink of water, and renews it. You have to do it again. So you don't know who it is. Every time someone comes and leaves, you have to doctor them. Because you don't know that whether that and someone's put the spell. Say she's got a little baby. And the spell's on that little baby. Okay. You come in from outside, and I've doctored her baby. You go and get your drink of water, or come in and pick you up. Just so you pick up something. Get something out of the house. Then I've got to go doctor that baby again. It don't do no good. Everybody comes and goes. You have to doctor the baby. So it keeps you about busy. You don't know who it is. See, people are coming and going. You don't know who it is. You can accuse them, but is that right or is it wrong?
You never let no one give even a drink of water for 9 days when you wrote that.
Ed Nice Pittsburgher was a great fellow. He believed in the witch and stuff like that. He's a very rough mountaineer. He cussed a lot too. And
My father went over one day to visit him about this time of the year. It was warm and he was in bed.
he didn't know what the matter. He just helpless in bed.
Witch doctor came there by the name of Ben Moats.
Ben Moats came and into him and talked that nice and pitied him,
He said, Uncle Adonias, what are you doing in bed? He said, there no witches are riding me.
He believed that certain women down here the road did something to him. And he got him to believe it and said, Adonias, sit up in bed. And he sat up in bed. Said, Adonias, put your shoes on. And he got up and sat up and put his shoes on. And after a while he said, Adonias Pittsburgher, go out to the horse stable and feed the horses. And he got up and we'll clear out the horse stable from the house out there and fed the horses and come back. And it seemed to be all right then.
She did this magic work, witchery they called it. So she had a certain stone in the fireplace that she would remove and lay on her hearthstone. Then she would go through her magic and she wouldn't go to bed that night. She would stay up and the next morning there'd be plenty ample amount of cornmeal on that clean stone for her to make hotcakes for the family for their breakfast. Her Aunt Eunie's husband had been an officer in the civil minor officer in the Civil War, and he lost his life in the war, and some people helped her apply for a pension, and it was $7, and she had 11 children. So she had this magic way of getting her money. She would take this little stone from the fireplace, above the fireplace, and she would lay it in another place on her hearth. The storekeepers and everything knew that she only got $7 a month, and she'd spend 40 and 50. And someone caught her putting the stone. And of course, she would lose her magic when she was caught doing her magic.
You know what hide and seek is? We had a little rhyme that say, hide and seek. A bush of wheat, a bush of rye. Whoever isn't hid, holler I. And here's how we changed it. A bushel of wheat, a bushel of oats. Whoever isn't hid, call old Ben Moats. See how we changed it? See how the children had in their mind?
Several old-timers like Ben Moats were widely known as witch doctors. They were called on to break spells thought to be put on people by witches.
There was one woman that had a child that they thought was bewitched, and they called him, and he told them, now there'd be somebody come there that week and want beet seed, and they wasn't let him have none. They let him have that beet seed, and the patient died. And they thought it died from being bewitched.
Well, you know, then the people would lose so many lambs in the spring, and they thought it was witchery, and they'd go to these old witch doctors. Well, Mom had one cow that she went and milked that evening. The milk was all right that evening. The next morning she went to milk, and her milk was all blood. Well, she took some of that milk and went and dug her a hole in the ground, wrote her a ticket, and got her some kerosene, lamp oil, took that milk and that ticket and poured it in that hole and set it in the fire. A couple of days after that, Dad's brother's wife come up and let her see she had burns all over her body.
And Mama dig a hole and put that milk down in there and beat it with a thorn. Name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. The witch, she would, well, we had one live down over the hill. She'd come up and say, the needles, something's sticking my legs. Mama beating that milk with that thorn. She'd come up and her legs would be full of holes. She was the one taking Mom's milk.
In some aspects of witchery, as in burning or beating the milk with a thorn, sympathetic magic comes into play. The theory is that whatever is done to the milk will put a counterspell into effect.
Some man made her mad about something, and she, I don't know if she named the needle or how she did it, but she heated it and bent it double, and he began to bend double. And then I think he went to Mary Lynch to find out how to break that spell. I'm not sure how he found out about that, but anyway, they told him to get a needle and heat it and bend it back, and that'd break the spell.
Whether it was through the action of magical charms like this, or through a long-standing female tradition of curing with herbs and plants, it seems women were, and are, most often accused of witchery.
We dealt with the green side of life. Nanny Yankee lived there on the south side of Petersburg in a little house, and It was said that she cured warts and cured people. She delivered a lot of babies and cured people of diseases, and they called her a witch. But see, that to me is not the way you should look at it. She was a healer. Maybe some people call that a witch. Maybe some people don't. My old cousin Ruth Lance, she did. I mean, she delivered a lot of babies, set a lot of broken bones, mixed up a lot of medicines.
Mary Lynch, they said she was a good witch.
In previous centuries in Germany, the church thought that those who had the power to produce counter spells were as guilty as the witches themselves. The debate continues. Is all magic and sorcery harmful or bad? In the old world, especially in Germanic countries, witches were typically women. Up to 90% of the accused witches in Germany during the Inquisition were women. They were generally thought by men to have entered into pacts with the devil. Common fantasies included women engaged in erotic behavior with the devil and flying off to the witches' gatherings called the Sabbat. Today it is still women who are generally accused of witchcraft. Accused witches, even in olden times, were neighbors, local people with whom you have daily dealings. There is a Judeo-Christian tradition of misogyny, and this, along with changing societal roles, emphasized the gender distinction. The ultimate discrimination came with the published work Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer, written at the urging of the Pope in 1484. This book had wide distribution in Switzerland and in Germany, from which numerous Appalachian families immigrated. Its depictions of women as the evil corrupters of mankind, along with the artwork of the period showing women making pacts with the devil, sealed their fate. Down through the years, women, and to a lesser extent men, have paid an awful price. It is estimated that 400,000 witches were killed during the Inquisition, mostly through burning and hanging after being tortured.
A lot of time is a woman that oftentimes a witch. Of course, a man can be too, you know. But I believe women is accused more of being witches around here than men.
The tide of German immigration to Pennsylvania started in the 1680s, about the time the European witch hunts ceased. People arrived in Philadelphia, and by the 1730s, they were spreading west and south on the Great Wagon Road. Medieval traditional beliefs were retained by a substantial number of the German pioneer families who, early on, settled on the frontier of western Virginia. Many were from the Rhine and Main valleys, where religious fervor was high and witch hunting was rampant. There came a procession of Reformed Lutherans and Anabaptists, including Mennonites and Brethren. Some had lived under religious persecution in Switzerland and Germany. They brought their perfectionist religious doctrines, distinctive worldview, and cosmology to this new land. This supported a belief in the supernatural, especially within the mystical teachings and folk spirituality of some factions, but in secular thought as well. Accordingly, witches, prophetic signs, omens, divination, and malevolent spirits were grounded in their psyche and came with them from the old world.
That old cure book, you know, what I told you about the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Well, that sounds pretty religious, don't it? But Dr. Krauss looked at it and he claimed it was the work of the devil. But if it's the work of the devil, my grandfather and my great-great-grandfather must have been the work of the devil. Well, my great-great-grandfather was a Lutheran preacher from Germany. That's why he was persecuted for his religious belief. It seems like they're getting a religion and a witch kind of mixed, kind of together, mixing them.
You can still be pretty smart, but if you've been conditioned a certain way from little up, it stays with you. You know, what happens when you're young has a lot of bearing on you later in life.
We went to church every Sunday, and they had a prayer meeting on Wednesday. We always went to it. And up there at the Mennonite church is where we'd always go.
Dovey is a person who has kept to the old ways all of her life. Dovey doctors for witches, meaning she uses methods she sees as being sanctioned by the Bible to remove and reverse spells she feels are put on her and her family by other people. She learned it from old people, her ancestors, including her Swiss and German foreparents.
They always done it. Ever since I remembered any of them, they all done it. So it just come down from... That's how us younger knowed from our relation back. And if you don't believe in it, you ain't believing the Bible.
Now, up in Dust Camp country, there's 2 old witches lived up there. Mary Lynch, they said she was a good witch. They didn't have enough milk for their dinner one day, and she took a dish rag and wrung milk out of it for their lunch.
And Dad worked way up the Rich Mountain there, and he said that there's a woman cooked, and they never had no cow, but she always had milk. There's cracks in the floor, and he looked down, and she was milking a towel. She's getting milk.
One day he come by there, and she's sitting out there. She's milking a towel, like she's milking the cow, and said you had a bucket full of milk just around that towel. So see, that made Mr. Pitzenbarger more than ever believe in this witch business.
And her name was Eunie Connard. At that time, she was about 100 years old. But she lived to be 114 before she died. I remember of seeing that old lady just very dimly, and the picture I have of her sitting on a little old porch on the side of their house with a bonnet on her head, and her eyes closed, just sitting there. And she was supposed to be a witch. She had 2 grandsons, and they always went to visit the Groves boys. The grandsons' names was Everett and Earl, and the Groves boys' names was Brooks and Arch. But the Groves boys would never go back because they had heard about Aunt Eunie's witchcraft. But this night they did. They went home with the boys to stay all night. And they were all sitting around the fire talking. Aunt Eunie's sitting there in front of the fire in her rocking chair. Ethel came in, the granddaughter Ethel, and she said, "Granny, we don't have no milk for supper." And she said, "Mm-hmm." So directly she come back and she said, "Granny, we need that milk now." "Mm-hmm," she said. She gets up and walks out, and as she goes by the stove, she takes a dish rag from the top of the stove, throws it over her shoulder. There was a hand axe sitting by the door, one bitted axe, and she picked that up, and she also gets a bucket that holds about 10 quarts. And she goes out around the log cabin to the dark side on the back side, and she puts that dishcloth across the end of the log, and with a good hefty swing, she puts that axe into that dishcloth. And after that, she twisted the dishcloth and set the bucket down under it, squatted down, put her knees down on the ground so she was comfortable, and sit there, and Arch Crows was watching her. He had followed her, and he said she milked the 10-quart bucket of milk out of the log and picked it up and went in the house. And he said, "We're going up the hill." Brooks caught up with me, and I told him what I saw. And Brooks said, "I saw all that went on in the house, and I saw just what you saw in there. You just got to see her milk the dish rag more than I got to see. But boy, I'm glad we didn't stay for supper." And they never did go back anymore. They stayed away from there.
A European woodcut from the 16th century shows a witch milking an axe handle. Like milking a dish towel, it stems from an ancient belief that a witch can steal the milk from another person's cow through sorcery.
There was a woman come from the head of Booger Hole to buy a hand axe handle. And she asked for a drink of water. She stood right there. And I had a tin cup sand and water buckets on the table. I just dipped her up a tin full of water, rest it to her, and I think she drunk it dry. And she bought that handle. Genus was there. And she paid Genus for this handle and took that handle and just walked off and never said another word, me, him, to nobody. And you couldn't make butter with this milk. You had to milk them cows. They'd pretty near go dry, and they was sucking young calves, but the milk was going someplace else. witches. I had this stove so hot it was red all over, and I put that milk in a iron kettle, set it on there, and it was red hot. And I put a 50-cent piece of money in the bottom of that kettle, and it says, "In God We Trust." And I let it get as hot as I thought it could get, and I just upended that milk right there in that kettle, and that milk just went all over this place, but it didn't burn me at all. I got plumb back out and just let it flop and pop till there wasn't a drop of nothing in this kettle or on this stove. And that night the cows come in with milk in their sacks. The cows was giving milk, and I had bought a bread pan down at a store, and I was to take butter and pay for that bread pan to bake in there with, and she was selling her butter to the same store, and some way or another they wanted me to finish bringing butter to them after I paid for my pan. But now when that was done, the cows come back to giving their milk. But now I quit selling butter. I was afraid to. For people was afraid of them. They absolutely, I believe, that they made children sick. You know, they had the power, almost as much power as the Heavenly Father.
Come, butter, come.
Butter making seemed magical before scientific reasoning explained the process. A charm was used to help bring about the transformation of the cream.
St. Peter's waiting at the gate for a sweet butter cake. Come, butter, come. And they'll sing the old swing churn back to the farm. He said the best thing you can do when a witch comes is to cuss them. Said that'll do more good than anything else. They had a bed there that they couldn't keep the cover on the bed. It'd come off. Be up there in bed and something would come pull the cover off of you. Hear something would come up the steps. After a little bit, the cover would come off the bed. And they said it'd pull it under the bed too. So Jake Captain, they said that come up the steps, and of course he didn't have the light on, I don't think. And it pulled the cover off. He got, but said one night he's up here and he got the hand. Said it had a small hand, but he couldn't hold it. He caught a witch, but he couldn't hold it.
Down the creek a ways on Reed's Creek here is the old Jerry Hartman place. And there's the old chimney still remains there. And this story was told to me by my mother as a child, and later on in life I heard the story told by my old medicine woman cousin named Ruth Lance. And me and Ruthie was driving by one day, and she's telling me, do you know the story of that? And I said, yeah, my mother told me about it when I was little. And then she told me the story again, that this man named Jerry Hartman and his wife and his family lived there, and that she loved to knit, and she told them when she died she would like to have them bury her knitting needles with her. And the lady died and nobody buried her needles with her. So from then on they couldn't sleep in the house. They heard the clicking sound of knitting needles till they couldn't sleep. And so they went and dug the woman up and buried her knitting needles with her, and the clicking stopped.
I've told with the old people that if you get a nail out of a coffin, it had great magical powers. And it's said that Ailey Props did that once. He claimed the reason he dug his mother up, people asked him why he dug his mother up. She'd been buried for a long time in a coffin. And he said her head wasn't laying right, and he wanted to turn her head. That is the excuse for digging her up. But everybody thought he wanted to get a nail out of her coffin. And which he did. They claimed he had great powers, magical powers, or with a nail. You could do a lot of things with that nail. And I've been told you could take that nail and put in an orchard and kill a number of apple trees that die when they drove in the ground. Now, they had some words to say with it, but I don't know what they said.
They called it a death crown. If anybody had them on their deathbed when they'd had to die, and their head was laying on this pillar, why, these feathers in there would knot up great big as your fist, and it just seemed like just grow together where they'd been picked off of the chicken. And they'd open them feather ticks after the funeral was over and take that ball out of there, and you couldn't pull it apart. For they said it was a death crown, and they wouldn't put it back in the pillar. They burned it up. I've seen Ma'am do that.
Yeah, the crown of death was supposedly the way it was formed, the feathers and all in the pillow. And when that was formed in somebody's pillow, they were to die.
And if that is there, we can pretty sure they went to heaven, that person that died. And if it wasn't, is a doubt in our mind.
We had tokens of war long about the 40th when the war broke out, and I seen these big fiery tokens floating in the sky.
They heard this knocking at the spring house, and they got the house that was this thing was a rapping up at the house. He said, "I'll take my gun, I'll go up here and I'll shoot it." He'd hear it, he'd run up the stairs, and when he'd get up there, it would quit. And he come back down. He did it several times. As soon as he'd run up there with a gun, it would quit. And then that night he passed away, and I never heard it anymore.
She died here in the room here we're sitting in right now. And Alfie Propst, it was along about midnight. At that time, people come in, Rose was bad, laying here in bed. My sister Rose, she was 12 years old, 1936. Said he'd come through the steep fields, and he hadn't got to the house yet. And said all of a sudden, he said he heard the prettiest music, said it seemed like it come from the sky. And he said, prettiest music he ever heard. And made him wonder what that meant. And he come on here at the house, and it's just at the same time that Rosa died.
And she said when they was walking home from school one evening, coming up off of the Reeds Creek Road up the Pretty Ridge to go home, there was a woman in the meadow down there in the old Fred Bundeemter meadow, and she was walking, and it was like she was floating and almost like she was transparent, and she had a long white gown on, and she said the gown was just flowing, and it looked like a woman she knew, and that night that woman died. Mm-hmm.
There is an old belief that a person who put a spell on you may be detected by looking in a mirror.
Taking him out to the rain barrel and had him to look down in that rail barrel, and he could see the person that was bewitching the other person. And I think they had a heck of a time to keep him from killing the other fella.
She saw her face in that mirror. She thought it was the devil. There's an old man that come from Pelton County. Mom knew him. He come there and he took the spell off of eyes.
Used to be an old fellow lived down here. He believed in that stuff. I mean, he was, I don't know. Come up here one day and he told me, he said, somebody had my cow bewitched. Said she just rolled over down there and just kind of tumbled and rolled. And I said, well, did you look to see if there's any yellow jacket nests around there? No, he said, it was a witch. Said, I heard the witch balls hit the cow.
Well, now, I was at a woman's house one time, and she kept hollering these a ball of hair going through the house. A ball of hair going through the house.
Hairballs can just appear like I would say, kind of like a tumbleweed for some reason. To me, to see a hairball is like a curse. I don't know what it means to other people, but that's the way I grew up believing, that there was something there behind that hairball being sent to you, because you don't let your hair get out of your possession. That's your power.
And if it hits you, it'd hurt you. But we always got back and got the witch ball and throw it in the fire.
Oh, I said, Aunt Mary, I said, what for ball of hair is it? Well, she said, you just sit still and you'll see it go through the house. Well, she was sitting like over there and I was sitting over here. Right now, a ball of hair went through between us.
They'd take their own hair and make a ball. And if it hits you, it'd hurt you.
They talk about these hairballs, and I think that's what they're referring to when they talked about a witch bullet. The same thing. It's actually not a lead bullet, it's something that made out of hair.
These red marks on his legs. And he said that's where the witches had shot him. And they had these red, like, I don't know, welts or whatever on his leg. They wasn't accusing him of being a witch. They was actually saying that the witch actually shot them.
You didn't cut your baby's fingernails or your baby's hair unless you took it out and buried it in a hole where nobody knew, so that the evils couldn't get a hold of it and curse your baby. Things like that. That's how I was raised, and I still don't have a problem with it. I did the same thing with my grandchildren and my children. Your hair is something powerful.
But I can get that's done make my throat sore, but now then I can just go, and there comes to say, Oh, yeah. These old timers had a terrible time with witches. I can remember old man George Madders had a cow down there that got sick, and they split her tail and put salt and pepper in it, and that didn't pepper out. They called it the holler tail that they had. Their tail would just hang limp like hanging a mop across the clothesline, and the only time it'd be any movement there's when the wind would blow it along or something like that. And so he got out his almanac and got to reading, and called Dr. Pettigoat. He was a moon doctor, and talked to him about it, and he told him what to do for the cow. And so they bored a hole in a log in the barn and filled it full of sulfur, and then they drove a white hickory peg in there. Now, and when that peg rotted off and spilt that sulfur out there, it would cause this curse to die and go away.
Now say you're going to be a witch. Okay, I don't know where you get them, but they call them the little black Bible. You take that little Bible and you go to a spring where it's running from the sun. Not toward the sun, away from the sun. Now this in here's running away from the sun. And that and up down in the garden hollers running direct toward the sun. Take that little black Bible and go to that stream, strip off, and wash in there. Take a bath in that water and tell God you're as free from Him as the water on your body. And then it turn out to be, you go according to the black Bible, the witch Bible. I had a first cousin that had one of them. And I'm going to tell you, I wish you could read one of them. It explains in there what to do, when to do it.
While these practices come from old family sources, The basis for this belief as to how to become a witch is found in the Witch Bible. A book commonly known as the Black Book or the Black Bible is attributed to King Solomon through the 1st century writings of Flavius Josephus.
Großvater ist übergekommen von Germany. Mein Wissen ist übergekommen about 200 Jahre alt. Aber even so long as es war schon now, war wir Witze, die von das Deutsch. Ganz leid für die Leute da sie glaube in das Hexes, aber das ist übergekommen von Germany.
Hex or witch signs are powerful occult symbols in use since at least the 12th century. After 300 years of use in this country, they are seen as decorative ornamental objects. The hex signs on barns were once thought by some to protect against witchcraft. Today, even though their value is tied to their decorative effect, they remain a mystery. Other charms and occult symbols show up in the material culture of German people along their route to and in West Virginia. Hex signs and reversed hearts on gravestones most likely had occult purposes through the mid-19th century when occult belief systems from Germany were strong. Hex signs, hearts, various birds in pairs, the tree of life, religious icons, heavenly bodies, and still to be explained symbols reflect their ethnic and religious makeup. Remember, youth, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me. Barns exhibit decorative artistic expression on the outside, but superstitious people also used occult symbols on the inside of barns and in houses to dispel witchery.
The barn didn't have any windows or anything in. You just had your doors where you went in. It was always a very dark barn. And I put these windows in, and lo and behold, I happened to be looking around. I looked up on the back side of the center beam that runs through the barn was this piece of paper that was tacked up to the back side of the beam. It had different magical phrases and I believe a magical square.
This symbol, also found in a local farmhouse, is said to have been used by early German mystics in Pennsylvania to protect their mud and stick chimneys from fire. This type of chimney construction is found in this West Virginia neighborhood as well. The symbol itself may be traced back to the Mithraic religion, common to 1st century Romans. A recent example was discovered at Pompeii. In Mithraic iconography, Perseus is depicted slaying a bull. Recent interpretation proves this to be symbolic of the passing of the age of Taurus in the cosmic world of astrology. The square spells 5 words in both horizontal and vertical directions. It has been used for occult purposes by many groups over the last 2,000 years, but interpretations vary. It came to this neighborhood with Johnny Arvin's great-great-grandfather in the 18th century, but was also known to Pennsylvania Germans through an early 19th century publication.
What this is used for, they believed there's magic squares, and you have to use those letters, what they stand for, and you have to believe enough in it that to do the trick. And that's what how about extinguishing a fire. To extinguish a fire and smoke without water, write the following letters on both sides of a plate and throw it into the fire. Thus it will extinguish itself slowly. The 5 words are SATOR.
As a young man with a keen, inquisitive mind, Johnny Arvin wrote down these cures from old family sources. They descend from a handwritten book his great-great-grandfather brought from Germany. The numerous examples include a magical number square that is used to control rabid dogs. Another square exists in the barn that is just over the hill from Johnny's farm. The numbers add to the same sum in any direction, including diagonally. These squares and other number formations, common in a branch of magic called numerology, are thought to have exceptional magical power. The word abracadabra in this barn, when found in its triangular forms, has been used for magical purposes for over 2,000 years. Talk is widespread about curious superstitions in this neighborhood.
Yeah, a witch couldn't step over the broom.
Uh-huh.
That's the way, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's why someone to come and they could tell when they're coming if they're the witch or not.
There was brooms over the door.
He would leave a broom lay across the doorway.
She always laid the broom down across the door, and she always claimed if that was a witch, when they come in, they'd pick the broom up.
Well, Harry had the witch's house, all that stuff hanging around. It burned that sulfur. Well, you could smell it when you get on the road.
There's widespread mention of sulfur, the biblical brimstone, when dealing with the occult. In medieval Europe, people were struggling with old belief systems, trying to mesh them with emerging scientific awareness. At this time, the field of alchemy developed out of ancient Islamic belief. Alchemists favored use of the divining rod. With a long history in Germany, it was utilized in America by religious mystics in attempts to locate buried treasure and precious metals. Rods are still commonly used today for a kind of divination often called water witching. Most communities have a water witch, and scientists continue to debate their usefulness. Religious leaders of old thought that water witches unmasked were incarnations of the devil himself. Witches represent the other, that is, the opposite of what is deemed normal or good. Medieval art depicts witches actively portrayed doing things in reverse. This concept is still known today.
But Mom always wrote a ticket and put it up over the front door. And she said, now, Love, she said, you watch, everybody comes. Said the witch will not come in forward. He'll have to back in. And I don't know how many people come there. They opened the door and just backed in. They didn't come in forward like me or you do.
These witches, doing things backwards, are very much like a local figure known as the belsnickle, who also did things in reverse. This old belsnickle illustration shows his witch-like behavior. Historically, there has always been a time when this oppositeness or otherness was openly celebrated and acted out. European countries observed this phenomenon near the beginning of the winter solstice. In Germanic countries, a midwinter character known as the belsnickle was present. Children were warned, be good, or the belsnickle will get you. Masking, revelry, and drunkenness was the rule of the day, even after this period of the year was converted to a religious holiday. Anglo-Celtic mumming traditions involving masquerade mingled with the belsnickle figure in Pennsylvania, and newer forms of the old celebration live on to the present in West Virginia. Belsnickles, Shanghai, and carnival participants, and the many versions of Santa Claus have been accused of representing both Roman and Norse gods. When Martin Luther disavowed the Catholic St. Nicholas in the 16th century, the German people responded by directing attention to the Christkind, or the Christ child. This name eventually evolved into Kris Kringle, and he then reverted back to a Father Christmas figure.
They looked really like a clown's outfit. It would be just like a loose fitting clothes around the neck and then elastic around the arms and the legs like that, and then something over your face so they couldn't tell who it was. And we would just go from house to house like that, just maybe all night long. Some of the neighbors had to crank telephone, and if you got houses and they would figure out which way you were going, well, one neighbor would try to call the next one and say that I had on so-and-so. Well, the big thing was we would switch outfits between the houses.
Not too long ago, in our church, they got the pastor and they went belsnickling.
They would come to our door and they would holler, "You want to see a pretty man tonight?"
It was between Christmas and New Year, wasn't it, at the belsnickle?
Everybody belsnickled. It was something to do when you had all your crops in and your cider made. And
the louder you could get, and the more cider you got, the louder you got.
Dress up in their false faces and the raggedy old ugly clothes.
These long john underwear, they cut them off and tie the top shut and then cut holes in them and paint them all up.
If you didn't guess who it was, they didn't have to take their false face off. So they might get away with some mischievous little things. That
You could change your voice pretty well, could you?
Oh, yeah.
We'd take some candy along and we'd throw that on the floor. And, the kids would be down there grabbing that candy. And we had a switch, we'd switch their fingers. Well, we'd still go in daylight and we'd call that Shanghai.
Robert mentions an old midwinter tradition called Shanghai. No one seems to know its origin, but the spirit of inversion or otherness is present in the masquerading and cross-dressing that takes place.
Some people are in it almost every year. Some people just decide to come out and walk down the street.
Dressed up and go down the street after Christmas and so on. And that's about all I know about it.
Some of the origin I know is Ronsford used to be bigger than Lewisburg, so they go down there and party all night in Ronsford. They come dragging up the hill in total state of dishevelment, and then just kind of parade through there.
Although the origin of the word Shanghai used in this sense is a mystery, the word belsnickel is better understood. It's a corruption of the German term Pels Nicholas, which means St. Nicholas in fur.
The last time I was out of belsnickel, I told him I was going to fool him this time. And of course we had her made out. If she couldn't guess it, then we'd take our faces off. And he gave up. He just couldn't get us. And she said, "Hollered, pull your faces off." I can see him yet. He was sitting on his chair and jumped up and showed out, "Yay!"
Dawson's. And they was a hard time then. And they killed the beef, their own beef, and hauled it to Ivydale on a sled and 2 horses. And they got down there and it was an awful cold day. Now I can remember this. And I was driving them, and the horses stopped, and turned their heads up and went to snorting, and these men just stood there and waited. They looked out before these horses, and they seen a great big object, bigger than any horse or anything like that, but looked like one. And this object kind of appeared, and on its side was the devil. Well, they stood there and them horses wouldn't move and just kept a snorting and a digging. And after a while that object left and them horses quieted down and went on to their barn. Now there's some pretty high power done that. And them was good people too. They worked and they paid their debts.
Hellbound parties. He called them at night. He's a Lutheran preacher. And he didn't believe in that stuff. And they're at that house, they're having a great big time that night, way late in the night. I don't know what they're doing. You have to guess. Must have been not nice. And all of a sudden, must have all been up. The door opened. And the devil walked in. Said he had chains, rattling chains. It had horns. So he didn't say anything. He just looked in there, walked in and looked at them, and walked and went back out. Oh, it scared him powerful. And they said he could smell sulfur burning too. Smell sulfur burning.
My mother always said, now, when you're little, your parents don't always tell you everything you think you should be told. But as a child, she talked about the witch war that went on up in towards, on in back Sugar Grove, that area back in there. And everybody talked about the witch war, how they cursed themselves out, cursed and counter-cursed. And, okay, I took it all in, but my mama said those people had carried it too far.
Then they got pretty far with it. They tried to thought of a cave over bewitched, and counterparts told me more about that. They're the ones that trying to burn a cave alive. Trying to burn it alive. They wanted to get the witch. They got the opinion I'd get the witch. You see, burn it, burn the witch.
What do you miss the most from the old time days that you don't have today?
My cow. I was born and raised with a cow, and I've lived with a cow all my life up till about 5 years ago. I miss my butter and my milk. The cow's what I miss worse.